I'm going to call this next video Intelligence of Pups, or Yard Intelligence versus Performance Intelligence. And it comes from my buddy RF. Nothing meant for illegal purposes. It's all history. And a lot of what I'm going to mention here can be used in today's time too. So the question came up, does the intelligence, especially of pups, does the intelligence of pups transfer over to the intelligence in a performance perspective? Meaning, anybody who has bred enough of them, if you're smart, you pay attention to your pups, how they behave, how they act. Some are what we call smart, some are what we call dumb. And you see different levels of it. You have to put them in different situations. For example, a pup might get wrapped up around something. And this is something I posted in my group too, so I think it bears mentioning in both arenas. But the pup could get wrapped up in something. One pup will recognize it and unwrap himself. Could be around a tree if he's on a lead, or get hung up, around his house or whatever. Some pups will recognize it and unwrap themselves. The other ones don't, and they just sit there dumbfounded. They don't know how to get loose. Instead of going back the other way, they keep pulling the same direction, trying to free themselves. And there's a lot of different situations where, if you mess with your pups, you see that. My kids did a lot for me in that respect. My daughter would come up and say, "Hey, Dad, that pup's dumb. You don't even know how to jump on his own house." Where litter mates, they get it right away. They recognize it right away. You sit on their house, they jump up there, and they judge the distance, they judge the height, whether they get a running start or from a standing position, and boom, they jump on the house, or at least they try to. Some don't do that, and they try over and over again, and they're too clumsy or whatever, immature, or the concept just doesn't get in their head. They won't even try, to jump. Maybe it's a height problem, maybe it's whatever it is. They don't have the same intelligence in that respect. Or you see dogs that you put them in a kennel, you put pups in a kennel, or even dogs, first time in a kennel, they could have a plethora of behaviors. Some will try and jump and get out, some will push and scratch, and others will just accept it, and they're mellow in there, they stand there, they understand they're confined. Some who you would consider to be more intelligent, they'll check the kennel for weak spots, or they recognize that there's a latch. They watch everything you do sometimes. So you're connecting the latch to the kennel, they see how the latch works, they try and pop the latch. They look for a weak spot in the chain link fence, or they understand if it doesn't have a roof on it, maybe I can jump out, or there's a weak spot on the top part, and they challenge that weak spot, see if they can crawl through. Some try to dig underneath, and or depending on how your setup is, they push against the chain and test it. Some do that, some don't do any of that. So that's all part of their intelligence. And does that transfer over to the performance side? Whether it's work ethic, whether it's the function you have them for, meaning are they better at it? Are they a better worker? Do they understand what you want them to do? Do they pick up on simple commands, encouragement, discouragement? These are questions that come up. I've mentioned before that, and a lot of people know this, Bolio dogs are very intelligent dogs. And when I speak of them, I speak of them in the past, their intelligence in competition, right? So the question would come, are they intelligence on the yard too? Do they have that yard intelligence? The little one example would be that little dog Ronnie I got from Boyles, right? Heavy Boleo. And I had my feed bag in the garage, and I brought Ronnie in there just to be with me, spend some time together, do some bonding, And he goes over to the feed bag and starts staring at it. Now, he doesn't attack it, doesn't try and take it down. He's not trying to get food, but he could tell, hear, or sense that something was in there. And when I finally paid attention, like, what are you doing? Why are you staring at the bag, and why are you pacing and all that? I could hear scratching in there. So I looked in, and there was 3 mice there. He heard them, smelled them, or sensed them, whatever it was, right? And all I did was tip the bag over, because I'm scared of mice. Anybody that knows me knows that. Anyways, that's a different story. We'll talk about that later. But I just tipped the bag over. The mice kept running out, and he snatched each one up. And as he snatched each one up, he swallowed them whole. Boom, boom, boom. So he was intelligent that way. And, he didn't have trouble understanding simple commands or behavior. Some dogs, like when you rub them down, they're funny about it, especially when you rub their toes or their tail or their feet, legs, stuff like that, He took to all that immediately. He understood that, not only was I rubbing him down because, I liked him, but he understood, I'd like to think he understood the benefits of the rub down. He liked getting rubbed down every part of his body. He never had a problem, never shied away from it, just took to it. Right? Now, some Boleo dogs are very primal and wild. You can't teach them too much, but in that performance aspect, they're very intelligent, right? As far as how they maneuver, how they wrestle, how they counter things, it's just natural to them. So that's the question, does that transfer over? And when my buddy asked me that, and he himself admitted, although we pay attention to all that and we put the pups through that, I wasn't really focused on that. Does that transfer over, right? Because thinking back, in some cases it did, in some cases it doesn't. But the point would be, on a larger basis, does that transfer over? Are there more dogs that are yard intelligent and it transfers over to performance intelligence than not? That would be the question. And it could depend on the bloodline. It could depend on the genetics. Some dogs may be yard intelligent, but they're slow and dumb in the performance, Meaning, if we're talking about the past, some dogs just chase a hole. They would chase a hole, didn't know how to counter, didn't know how to change up, mouth wide open, just pushing forward like that. That to me is a dumb dog. I didn't really like dogs like that. They have to figure out a way to get out of that situation or counter that situation, right? So as pups, that's why, it's important to do as much as you can with them, spend as much time, see where their intelligence lies, see where their work ethic lies, all those factors that we talk about, in all these chats and all these videos and all these, groups, Some other examples would be, Clayton Blood. He was a head dog, very intelligent dog in competition, right? Smart. He could maneuver, he could spin, he would do things that you've heard about, read about, and I did too, until I seen my own dog do it. You don't fully understand what they're talking about until you see it with your own 2 eyes. For example, if he was backed up to the wall, once his tail hit, he would spin out. If he got backed into a corner, he would put his feet up on the sides or up on the top and walk himself out. I seen him with a head hold, face hold. The dog pushed forward and he spun over the dog, which caused the dog to flip over the opposite direction, and he landed on his feet. and he could counter very well, you know, a rough dog, uh, by getting on their muzzle if he had to, on their head if he had to, on their ears if he had to. If the dog was pushing towards him, you know, he had a way of spinning around where that dog weight would go past, you know, as he's spinning, just spinning in a circle. The dog never could catch him, you know. Sometimes they caught him and he would have to chew his way out, get on that muzzle, and make the dog come out of the hole. And he wasn't a hard biter, but because the dog is trying to get out of that hold, he's doing damage to his own self. Now, as far as yard intelligence, he was a calm dog. He didn't get worked up. He didn't waste energy, you know, very amiable with people and kids and all that, right? Easy to work. He took to the work easy, picked it up like nothing, just a natural. Had great air. So he was intelligent in that way, where other dogs might be running their chain or acting up, barking and all that. He didn't. He was a great conservator of energy. And, you know, if he had a reason to get worked up, something got close to him or something, or you faced him up, then no hesitation. But he just had that calm smartness about him that told me, you know, his attitude was, why am I going to get worked up for nothing? You know, I can't get to it like everybody else. Even if something's barking at him or screaming at him or something, you know, he knew he was chained up. He knew the other one was chained up. They're not going to go anywhere. There's not going to be any contact. So why get worked up? In his case, I would say that intelligence transferred over. And probably most people will say, yeah, but, you know, I want examples of it. And examples from all the way around. There may be examples of dogs that were yard intelligent but not performance intelligent, or dogs that were yard intelligent and performance intelligent, or dogs that weren't yard intelligent but were performance intelligent. I just thought it was an interesting topic because I never really thought of it that way. I just look at the individuals and I judge each one, but I didn't really think about making the correlation. And I would guess it does transfer over. You know, intelligence in some ways is intelligence, you know. And there's a lot of examples of dogs doing that. You know, they understand the situation and they can react accordingly. Some dogs, it could be because they're wound up. It could be because they don't care. It could be because they weren't exposed to certain situation where they don't show that kind of intelligence on the yard. You know, they're just sitting there all day and there's nothing to stimulate their mind. So that might have a lot to do with it too. You have to stimulate the dog. You have to expose it to different situations. You have to teach it whatever you can. Or you have to have certain little tests that you come up with to check where their intelligence lies, you know. But like I said, I just thought it was a very interesting situation, you know. And throughout history, you see dogs like that. For example, there's a real good brood female, right, who was raised inside the house, raised around the kids. And she belonged to a guy. He wasn't really a dog man, but, you know, he liked pit bulls. So someone broke into their house one day, into the kids' room, and she was in there. And once the intruder got in, of course, she attacked him. She jumped on him. And she held him down by standing on him, and she bit him right on his chest. Just held him there, right? Didn't try and kill him, and the guy didn't do nothing. Of course, with his dog on him, the female had a hold of him, and he didn't move. And he didn't move till the cops got there, right? So to me, her intelligence meant that she understood the situation, the children needed protection, this person doesn't belong in this room, but she protected to the level of the threat. Now, if the guy had got violent, I'm sure she would have got more violent with him because the threat would have increased. So she would have had to increase her defense. To me, that's another form of intelligence, right? And she was never matched, but she was checked and produced to be a prove to be a good producer, you know. So there's that also, you know, how they behave around humans, you know. And, you know, some dogs recognize people. They get that feedback from people, whether it's pheromones, whether it's their breathing, whether they're sweating, you know, their body language, their mannerisms, you know. They can tell the difference between who's a threat and who's not. And a lot of them, and mine would too, they would protect to the level of the threat. And that's something also that could transfer over into performance, meaning the dog understands the situation of the performance, whatever it is you're using it for, whatever the function of that dog is. They pick up on it, they understand it, and they almost like a natural to it. And you know, it's kind of like most dogs. You have to introduce them and show them and teach them how to use a treadmill. But there's some dogs, and I've seen them, and I had one, where first time you put them on a mill, they just start working it. They understand what it's for, whether they know what the function is or whether it's the way your behavior is. You're telling them to work or come on or whatever, you know. And it's not like they're shy and they're looking around and, you know, they have to get used to it. They just jump on it and start walking it or trotting it and running it. And if you encourage them, they'll work it faster. And when you stop encouraging them, they'll slow down. And you can actually adjust their pace verbally just by what you say to them. Right? That always seemed to me amazing. And in my mind, I'm thinking, well, treadmills have been used with the breed for so long. Is it something that's inherent in the breed where some of them have that natural instinct to just run the treadmill? Right? And the same could be said for a cat mill or a spring pole or a flirt pole. You know, spring pole and flirt pole is a little bit different because there's something for them to grab onto once they see it, once they figure out what it is, or you wave it or shake it in front of them and tell them to get it, you know. That is a lot easier to teach them, so to speak, than say a treadmill. And what I'm speaking of is these dogs, the few that I seen and the one that I had, took to the treadmill naturally. You didn't have to bait them with anything. You didn't have to put anything in front of them, you know. I mentioned before I used a mirror sometimes, you know, and I had a tall mirror where they could see themselves, and it was on a, you know, could spin around. And when I faced them up, they saw themselves in the mirror and they work harder. If I wanted them to slow down, I just flipped the mirror around to the backside and they'd slow down because there's nothing in front of them to see. There's no other dog there, quote unquote, other dog there for them to chase. These are dogs that just took to it and started working it. And the one I had, it was just a steady pace. He didn't really run it. He didn't walk it. He didn't gallop, sprint, nothing that. He just hit the pace and boom, boom, boom. Just like if you were taking them out for a walk, you know. And if you have the opportunity to take your pups out, you know, we used to, because there was acres and acres around our house, we'd take them out in the field. And, you know, you see how they act out there, quote unquote, in nature, you know. They get fresh air. They understand that they're free. They can run around. There's nothing really stopping them from going here and there. And you'll see some chewing on grass, and you'll see some smelling here and there. You'll see some find these rabbit holes or squirrel holes, and some will dig, some won't. Some will back away because it's something weird that they never smelled before. But some of them that have that instinct where they understand it's another animal down there, and they'll try and dig. Even little puppies, they'll try and dig and smell. You know, they may pick up bugs and eat bugs, you know, or find something, a stick or some old whatever that's out there, you know, a rock or something, and grab it and start running with it or playing with it or shaking it, you know. And some won't. And this is all within the same litter, you know. And if you have more of them in the litter that exhibit these, you know, yard intelligence instincts, I think, you know, you have a better chance, at least in that respect, for those pups becoming something, not just a dummy that sit there and don't understand anything. Because it may be harsh to say some dogs are stupid. They are. They don't have a lot of those other instincts, you know. And it doesn't mean they aren't perfectly fine in the performance sense, but the intelligence part, they're dumb as a rock, you know. Some dogs are serious types. None of that stuff interests them. Not even the bonding, not even the affection you show. They have a good work ethic, and they have the instinct for what they were bred for. And that's what I mean, a more serious type. Not that they're human aggressive or anything like that, but they're just a somber, serious, you know, stoic type of dog. That could mean that, you know, their instincts are based on their function, and all that other stuff doesn't really interest them. Because those types, you know, in the past, you face them up, they have no problem doing what they were bred to do. But as far as teaching them this and that, they're good with exposing them to work. And I never had one that didn't work good, you know. They were just as good as the other ones as far as work ethic mattered. But they just weren't tuned into the affection and the bonding. And it wasn't like you couldn't pet them. I could pet them all day long. They just really didn't matter to them, you know. They kind of like, almost like they ignore it, you know. They allowed me to do it, okay. They got the benefits from a rub down, but it wouldn't have mattered one way or the other if I did it or not. So there's all these behaviors with dogs, and it's important, in my opinion, to figure out who's smart and who's not, what will do what, and what won't they do, and all these little things that are involved, because there's so much. And it just gives you a better understanding of your own dogs, your own blood, and it'll allow you to choose which direction you want to move forward in your breeding, or which direction they're showing you to move forward, you know. And I mean, there's a lot of examples, you know. Just like we look at dogs, some have better air than others, some have harder bite than others, some are certain styles or whatever, you know. Some are good for weight pull, some are better for treadmill race, like that, you know. You have to figure out which ones are better at what, or what do they like better, and then encourage them to be good at that or better at it, and, you know, build on that. And when it comes to the breeding part, you can see what faults they have. If it's a major fault, like I mentioned before, in my case, I wouldn't breed them. If it's a minor fault, then you can breed them and negate that minor fault, or increase some other thing that they have with them. Which is why I advise, you know, if you have two dogs with faults, the same fault, don't breed them together, because you're increasing the chance of the pups having that fault, and not only that, but making that fault worse by doing so. So when you breed dogs like that, you have one that has this fault that you don't really particularly like, you breed it to one that doesn't have that fault, and you can negate it more and more that way. For example, I wouldn't breed two dogs that were destructive. I wouldn't breed two dogs that were shy together. I wouldn't breed a male and female if they're both shy together, because I've seen the effects of it. You're going to get shy dogs if you do that. Or more of them, you know, more within a litter. You know, you might have one or two that ain't, but you might have 5 or 6 that are. Same thing with the destructive thing. And it's the same thing with every trait. If you want to talk about gameness, mouth, air, you know, you might try to increase the air, you know, by using a dog that has great air over one that doesn't. But if you breed two dogs that don't have very good air, that's what you're going to get, dogs that don't have very good air. So in respect with intelligence, I would breed two dogs that are intelligent. And if you're going to breed a dummy to an intelligent dog, you know, that's the way you can hopefully negate that ignorance, you know. But I wouldn't breed two dumb dogs together. You know, that's going to increase the odds of getting dumb dogs, you know. People sometimes get offended with the words we use or the verbiage we use, you know. But in the past, those words were not offensive. Ignorance was not an offensive word. It's been made to be offensive because it denotes that you don't have intelligence, and that's not really what it means. It means you don't have education. That's the original meaning of ignorance, without education. So if you get more education, you're not so ignorant. It's that simple. And that's the way I looked at the dogs. If you're trying to improve them, you've got to recognize whatever faults they have and try to negate them in future breedings or cull them out of your breeding program altogether. There's nothing wrong with that. That's how you improve the breed. So intelligence is not something that's talked about a lot. I thought I'd bring it up because it's important. And again, does that yard intelligence transfer over to the performance intelligence? And I'm pretty sure most people will say, yeah, but I want examples also. It's one thing to say, yeah, I think so. Yeah, they do. Yeah, I believe it. Of course it does. But, you know, give one or some instances where you've seen it. Give some examples. You know, that's what I try to do. And that's what I'm trying to do here. But overall, in the past, that wasn't on my mind, you know, and maybe it should have been. Maybe that was a fault that I had. Maybe that was my ignorance. That maybe I should have paid more attention to that. You know? So that's one of the reasons I'm sharing it. In today's time, somebody can utilize that if they care to. But I didn't really look at it that way, you know. Are the smartest ones better at performance? Does it matter? So we need examples of that, and a lot of them. And then it could get down to particular bloodlines or families of dogs, you know. Like I said, Boleo dogs are very smart. They have a lot of pit intelligence. They did, you know. Did that transfer over? In some cases, I would say, of course. Like that little Ronnie dog I mentioned, you know. I had another one, a Boleo dog, that it didn't transfer over like that. She was wild and crazy, but not yard intelligence that way. So that's only 2 examples, but that's not enough, you know. And, you know, some, like I said, Boleo dogs are not yard intelligent that way. They're too wild. They're too primal. And they got that one thing on their mind, which is good for back in the day, what we want them for. That's great. That's what you want. A lot of the Heinzel dogs were very intelligent, meaning not only were they intelligent in performance-wise, they were real amiable around people. And they could be off lead a lot of times, and they understood what you wanted them to do, and they could understand commands of, you know, hey, leave that alone, don't do that, don't eat off the plate, stay out of the garbage, stuff like that if you had them inside. They didn't chew a bunch of stuff, not all of them, but I've seen some examples, and I've had 1 or 2 of Heinzel dogs that were like that. And again, you know, it could go the other way too. But they were very intelligent, you know. That Bullshit dog, Champion Bullshit, who was the white blood crossed with basically Heinzel blood, was a very intelligent dog. He took to work in a cat mill like a pro from day one. He could be inside, he wouldn't eat in the garbage, you know, he wouldn't get in the garbage, he could leave a plate of food out, he wouldn't snatch the food. Very intelligent dog in that respect, and he was intelligent performance-wise too, you know. So that's another example. Could it be that you know, the Heinzel blood in him brought that out? You know, I would say yeah, because I've seen enough Heinzel dogs to know that they're pretty smart that way. Very intelligent yard-wise in the house like that. And most of the ones I seen were the rough type as far as performance went. You know, they weren't really head dogs like that, but they weren't dumb. They could counter and move and knew what to do when it was time to do it. Most of them fought rough, you know, because that's what most people like anyways, but in a smart way, you know. So again, this is a topic that I thought was worthy of mention. Thanks to my buddy for bringing it up. And in this video, you know, I'd like to see, or at least hear, people's opinions, you know, and it could be ongoing for however long, but I appreciate anybody's input on what their experience is with it. So once again, thanks for all your support, and thanks for watching my vid. I'll do another one soon. Got some more interviews coming up, or repeat interviews too, you know. I'm going to try and get Tim back on and Mr. Paul back on, different ones, but some new ones too. I just got to set them up. So thanks again.